welcome all of you and our guest this morning, Robert Pinsky, on behalf of the Graham and Mary Jane Smith family, whose generosity created this writers series 8 years ago. As always, this program is for you, the students at Nichols. It's not a public series that you are invited to share. Feel privileged that way. It's a rare thing when adults agree with your essential impulses that say, yes, it is all about me. We agree. It is all about you. The Smith program is. Take advantage of it. Savor it. I first met Robert Pinsky the year I received the Smith Writers Chair in 2008, when I joined 5 other aspiring poets to work with him for a week at Aspen Writers. And I must say that getting our 3-time poet laureate onto the Nichols stage, or the floor in this case, has been a goal of mine since then. This past summer, I attended the Favorite Poem Institute at Boston University, where Mr. Pinsky teaches. There were visiting poets who read and taught the symposium, and Robert was always the one who introduced them. He prefaced the first reader with, "We don't make a big deal with introductions here," and then he would say something like, "Here's Carl Phillips, who wrote a bunch of poems," or "Welcome William Shakespeare, who wrote some plays and some sonnets," and that'd be it. So I promised I would not go big with this welcome. I will leave you with this. Robert Pinsky is a poet and a promoter of other poets and their works. He's a bard, one of those singers who would arrive in a village and people would gather to hear songs and stories in front of the hearth, or if the village had more than a cottage or two, in the village green. They would make people laugh, or think, or pray. They would bring news, perhaps of some impending danger, that barbarians were arriving from the frontier, or worse, that some civilizers were intent on destroying not just their village, but their culture. Here's Robert Pinsky, who wrote some poems.
Thanks very much, students, and thanks, Mr. Hotels. I'll stay with that idea that this is about you. My agenda is to be useful to you. I don't have any purpose other than to supply whatever I can, and I'm aware that this is a school where you already do quite a lot of studying of poetry, and compared to some places where I turn up, you even know a lot about me, and for example, this anthology assignment, I have a problem. This is my personal anthology, and as I hope will be true for many of you, it's a lifelong project. There's a computer file called Anthology. Every year or two, I print it out again. I put mine alphabetically so I don't need a table of contents, and it's like a security blanket for me. I talk to a group like you, and a lot of things I love are right here. I think maybe, since I'm here in person, I know some of you have even seen me in video, probably vocality, probably my voice is the most useful thing I can do. I hope that despite the size of the group, that it's a whole 9 through 12 assembly, I hope at some point you'll feel free to ask questions. I'll warn you, I will invite questions. And as they say in the music business, we do requests. If there's something I've written or something you've heard me write about or talk about, I'm welcome. I'd be happy to read it aloud to you. This is a 2-line poem, not by me, 19th century poem, that I use as an illustration of what for me is the most important thing about poetry compared to other arts. This is a kind of school where probably a lot of people know what lethe is. My conviction about things like that is, if this poet did a good job, you don't need to know what lethe is. 2 lines. On love, on grief, on every human thing, time sprinkles Lethe's water with his wink. The poem was written in the early to middle 19th century by Walter Savage Landor, an upper-class Englishman who was very learned in Greek and Latin. I'll say it another time. On love, on grief, On every human thing, time sprinkles Lethe's water with his wing. I am not an upper-class Englishman. I don't know Greek and Latin. I'm a lower middle-class Jew from New Jersey. But when I say Landor's poem, 3 times at the beginning, I put my upper teeth on my lower lip. On love, on grief, on every human thing. And 3 times at the end, I purse my lips. Time sprinkles Lethe's water with his wing. Now, of course, Landor didn't think about that. Nobody writes a poem by saying, well, what should I have them do with their mouth? Maybe the teeth, it's not how you compose things. It's more like playing a sport and then you watch a slow motion breakdown of what the person is doing as they run or jump or catch a ball or throw a ball. I'm calling attention to the intensely, I'm tempted to say physical, but I'll say bodily, in Latin, corporeal nature of the art of poetry. And I've even seen a couple of papers that people here have written. You don't need me to talk to you about the meaning of poems. It's a great school, you have great teachers in relation to poetry. So I'm going to concentrate on that bodily aspect of the art. It's deeply related to popular culture, to hip-hop, rap, to all kinds of vocal music. And I think it's one of the deepest things in human beings. They've now discovered not only that infants start doing their experimental vocalizing in Chinese or Portuguese or English or Swiss or Japanese when they're just a few weeks old. I swear to you, I'm married to a psychologist, I swear to you, they've done studies that demonstrate definitely, that in the uterus, that fetus, the child before being born, already is starting to get accustomed to the rhythms and tunes and consonants and vowels of the language. It goes that deep in us. And the mother's voice, along with the mother's face, is very important. This is very deep in us. I'll switch to culture. Culturally, before we had digital information, we had printed information. Before we had printed information, we had written, incised information. Those are all fairly recent. Ancient, going deep, is chanted information. The griots in Africa, if you've ever read Alex Haley's Roots, they can tell you 1,000 years back who was whose ancestor. If we want to say to the descendants, where's the best food at what time of year, what are the best burial customs, the best marriage customs, we do it with some equivalent of singing or dancing, poetry. I assume it was one thing. I assume that our remote ancestors did all of the above. Teach the child, and that chanting and dancing is not at the fringe of human intelligence, it's at the center. And it's how this rather pathetic looking animal, almost useless claws and teeth, they're not very good weapons, patchy fur, kind of weak. We've dominated the planet because we can communicate with the ancestors and with the descendants, with these grunts. So I'm going to talk to you about the grunts and Landor's poem on love, on grief, on every human thing. That's a kind of a prelude demonstration of what I want to talk to you about the voice. Who knows what Lethe is?
It's the river in Anthology that erases the memory.
Yeah, it's the river in the underworld that makes you forget when you're dead. I found out by looking it up that, like many, many important things, it's based on a misunderstanding. There's a Greek word and a Latin word, and I may have this reversed, but I believe it's the Latin word that has to do with dying. Like it says something is lethal, you get a lethal dose, and it's the Greek word that's not related, but happens to use the same consonants and means forgetting. And it's a great misunderstanding. Yeah, it's the river of forgetfulness. But really, reading a poem, all you have to know about Lethe is Lethe's water. It's what time sprinkles on everything. The answer is there in the poem. I'll say another poem to you. And I'm talking to you about poetry and how one says what the different pleasures are of saying poems aloud in different ways. And I'd like to relate it to the pleasures. I'd like to relate the pleasures and limitations of poetry to the pleasures and limitations of singing, of rap music, of any moment in American culture. Let's not just say rap music, let's say Cole Porter songs, Chuck Berry songs, blues. All these different modes or ways of giving bodily emphasis, bodily expression and articulation to words. Here's the poem. Don't worry about the meaning. I'm talking about sound here. You can't avoid the meaning. The meaning will get you anyway. You don't have to concentrate on it. Of course, how many people here already know To Earthward? Good. I didn't want to be doing stale material. To Earthward. Love at the lips was touch as sweet as I could bear, and once that seemed too much, I lived on air that crossed me from sweet things, the flow of, was it musk from hidden grapevine springs downhill in the dusk? I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle that when they're gathered shake dew on the knuckle. I craved strong sweets, but those seemed strong when I was young, the petal of the rose it was that stung. Now, no joy but lacks salt that is not dashed with pain and weariness and fault. I crave the stain of almost too much love, the sweet of bitter bark and burning clove. When stiff and sore and scarred, I take away my hand from leaning on it hard in grass or sand. The hurt is not enough. I long for weight and strength to feel the earth as rough to all my length. Pretty good, huh? Anybody know who the author is? I hope it's a bit of a surprise to you. The author is Robert Frost. Best known for his second-rate poems. You know about the two woods in the poems? People know that rather than To Earthward or the most of their direct literature. His great poems are his less well-known poems. When I said that poem aloud to you, I was trying to give you two kinds of information. Something is being said, an emotion is being felt. That's one kind of information. It is arranged in a very symmetrical, let's say, musical way. That's a second kind of information. I was trying to do both at once. It's similar to what I feel when I hear the Takash String Quartet play late Beethoven quartets. It's what I feel when I hear Charlie Parker playing Coco. There's the feeling and there's the symmetry. And what I'm advocating to you quite practically is to try to do both. What if I gave you only one kind of information, just the symmetry? Love at the lips was touch, as sweet as I could bear, and once that seemed too much, I lived on air that crossed me from sweet things. The flow was at musk, from hidden grapevine springs, downhill at dusk. I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle. It's almost unbearable, isn't it? I can't explain any of this. I don't know why it sounds so great to say. I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle that when they're gathered shake dew on the knuckle. It's like the Charlie Parker musical phrase is going and then the rhythm is there underneath it. I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle that when they're gathered shake dew on the knuckle. There's the symmetry and there's something moving through the That's the main thing I have to say to you. And I don't know why it works so well. But I know that sounds better than I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle that when they're gathered shake dew on the knuckle. What if I emphasize the other kind of information, the feeling, without paying any attention to the symmetry? I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle when they're gathered shake dew on the knuckle. So you have the naive, crude, emphasizing the rhythm, alternative. And you have the ham actor, corny, expressive alternative. And somewhere in between them is, in one syllable, art. I had the swirl and ache from sprays of honeysuckle when they're gathered shake dew on the knuckle. And when you listen to popular music, when you listen to highbrow music, when you listen to your mom and dad's or your grandpa's music or your music, when you read poetry in the New Yorker magazine or that one of your teachers gives you, I urge you to think about those two kinds of information. And a lot of things that we strive, we who make art, a lot of our striving is to be able to do both at once. And it's true of pop music, it's true of highbrow poetry, and I hope it's true for you when you make art. Now, I warned you that I was going to invite questions and requests, and the moment has now come. There will now be questions or gentle remarks from the students, or a prolonged, embarrassing silence. Yes, is it Sean? Sean and I rehearsed this.
Many of the great poets that we've learned about in school have grown beards. Later in life, do you plan on growing a beard?
I have a beard right now. Where'd it go? Sean says that many of the great poets have grown beards. It's disappointing. Sean, you're what, about 15, 16? 18? He's a sexist old man. He's ignoring half of the humanity that writes poetry.
They warned that.
Nice start, Sean.
Where's your
Michael? Brady. Sorry, I knew it was trochaic. Yes, Brady.
Where's your sort of happy place that you go to write? Like, what's your ideal?
Sean asked about the process of writing. What is the happy place for me to write? When I was your age, I won't exaggerate, but when I was your age, I did not have a great time. I did very badly in school, especially around the 8th, 9th grade. I was in what was called the dumb class, also known as the bad class. Those weren't the official euphemisms, but that's what people called them. And this is related to a part of me that does not like, I get stage fright if everything is just right. So if I'm in a cabin in the woods, it's quiet, and have a lot of free time, a beautiful desk, and the right writing equipment, I go crazy. I say, I wonder what's on TV, and who can I call up? I have written in airplanes and airport departure lounges. I grew up in a noisy family. I don't like, I must have habits, but I don't like thinking about it. So this is just gossip. Everybody's different. Doesn't mean you're not a real poet if you like to write every morning at 7 and you like to be in a quiet place. I don't like to have, if you ask me what I have for breakfast, I usually feel I'm lying. I don't like routines, I don't like preparation. So whenever one of my wise guy answers to the question is, when do you write? My answer is, whenever it's inconvenient. If it seems like you're not going to do it, then I feel released and I'm happy. This is not the right time, this is not the appropriate time for it. That feels good. But this is Robert, we're now on a writer's retreat. This is an artist colony. Here's your cabin. We will bring you lunch. You will write in the morning. I don't like that. As I said, I maybe want to watch TV or call somebody up or do something. Yes?
In terms of talking about musicality, how do you personally define poetry as distinguished from other writing? Consider it these.
Good, reasonable question. How do I define poetry compared to other arts? I sort of avoid the question and sort of answer it by saying, a poem is a work of art made out of the sounds of a language. A poem is a work of art made out of the sounds of the language, and you're given the opportunity to quote a so-called free verse poem, because the Lander poem is in rhyme, and so is the Frost poem. Here's William Carlos Williams's poem, Fine Work with Pitch and Copper. It's related to Brady's question about when you're right. Williams was a medical doctor in the best state in New Jersey, and he is said to have kept a typewriter in his office, and he would sometimes write a poem very quickly between patients. And this poem, I picture Williams looking out a window and seeing guys doing roofing. Roofing often very brutal in the trades. Roofers get the worst. It's dangerous, it's hard, you're exposed to the elements, you use messy, brutal materials compared to being even a plumber. Fine work with pitch and copper. And I'll tell you, in line with what I did with the Lander poem in the mouth, the poem begins in the key of eh. You'll hear eh, and then it modulates into ooh and eh and ooh. Fine work with pitch and copper. Now they're resting in the fleckless light separately and in unison, like the sacks of sifted stone stacked regularly about the flat roof, ready after lunch to be opened and strewn. The copper in 8-foot strips has been beaten lengthwise at right angles and lies ready to edge the coping. One still chewing picks up a copper strip and runs his eye along it. There's 3 sentences in the poem. He puts in that middle sentence, it looks like it could be in a manual for doing roofing. The copper in 8-foot strips has been beaten lengthwise at right angles and lies ready to edge the coping. It's a beautiful sentence. The consonants and vowels are beautifully arranged. It uses the minimal number of words to convey the information it conveys. The copper in 8-foot strips has been beaten lengthwise at right angles and lies ready to edge the coping. It would be a good sentence in a piece of prose. The next sentence begins with a word that has an odd chiming with coping. The copper in 8-foot strips has been beaten lengthwise at right angles and lies ready to edge the coping. One still chewing picks up a copper strip and runs his eye along it. That degree of intensity of sound, one's coping, one still chewing, picks up a copper strip and runs his eye along it. And I think Williams is a great poet, and it's partly because he's doing such a great thing with sound. He always notices things that other people don't notice. Like, everybody here has probably had the experience of when you're doing some physical work, you take your break to have a snack or lunch, and there's luxury in doing a little of each. You're still chewing. You run your eye along the copper. Another one of his poems, The Young Housewife, he describes himself as he passes her at the wheel of his car. He bows as he passes. And yes, you can bow when you're at the wheel of the car. It takes Williams to notice it. And he notices it while making these beautiful sounds. Now they're resting in the fleckless light separately and in unison. Like the sacks of sifted stone stacked regularly about the flat roof and ready after lunch to be opened and strewn. And again, you can read it either of 2 bad ways by giving only one kind of information. You've probably heard people read poetry like this. Now they're resting in the fleckless light, separate and in unison, like the sacks of sifted stone, stacked regularly, overemphasizing what's the same. Now they're resting And the fleckless lights separately, you know, the overexpressive. No, it's more human. It's more direct than that. Now they're resting in the fleckless lights separately and in unison, like the sacks-assisted stones stacked regularly about the flat roof, ready after lunch to be opened and strewn. So, in answering your question, as I say, I partly ducked the question because I haven't really answered what this question of art, work of art. But a poem is a work of art made out of the sounds of the language. The way a piece of sculpture might be a work of art made out of wood or plastic rosin. A building is a work of art the architect hopes made out of building materials. A poem is a work of art made out of the sounds of the language.